The official history of Joseon says that a 17-year-old boy, alone in a mountain village, hanged himself. That's the record. That's what they wrote down. But here's the thing. Nobody believed it then. Nobody believes it now. Not the scholars, not the court officials who wrote it, not even the dynasty itself, which kept quietly revising the story for the next 200 years. So what actually happened to King Danjong on that November night in 1457? That's what we're going to find out today. So if you've watched The King's Warden, and at this point, half of Korea has, because it just became the country's highest grossing film of 2026, you already know the basic shape of this story. Boy king, ruthless uncle, exile in the mountains, a tragic end. And yes, the movie is genuinely moving. But here's what movies do. They pick one version of events and commit to it. They give you clean answers. History? History is messier than that. Because the death of Danjong is one of those rare cases where Joseon's own official records, the most meticulous dynastic chronicles in human history, directly contradict themselves across 3 different reigns. Not minor discrepancies. I mean, was it suicide? Was it poison? Was it strangulation? Depending on which volume you open, you get a completely different story. And every new version was written by people with something to hide. So today, let's do what this channel chooses. Let's put the official story aside. Let's look at the cracks. And let's talk about what probably really happened to the grandson of Sejong the Great and why the truth was buried for over 2 centuries. To understand how Danjong died, you first need to understand how extraordinarily alone he was. And I want to be clear about something. This wasn't just a sad story. It was a structural tragedy. The kind where you look back and think, every single safeguard failed at exactly the wrong moment. Here's who Danjong was. His grandfather was King Sejong the Great. His father was King Munjong, Sejong's eldest son, brilliant, respected, the first king in all of Joseon history to be both the eldest legitimate son of a king and to have an eldest legitimate son of his own. A perfect line of succession. Actually, the most legitimate king Joseon ever produced by their own rules. And then everything collapsed in about 4 years. Danjong's mother died giving birth to him. His grandmother, Sejong's queen, died not long after. His grandfather, Sejong, the greatest king Korea ever produced, died in 1450. His father, Munjong, already in poor health, died just 2 years into his reign in 1452. Danjong was 11 years old, an orphan, a king, with no one who could actually protect him. And waiting in the wings? His uncle, Prince Suyang, a man who have spent years watching his brilliant older brother sit on the throne he wanted and now saw his 11-year-old nephew sitting there instead. The word for what happened next in Korean is Gyeojeongnan, the coup of 1453. But calling it a coup almost makes it sound clean. What Suyang did was organize a night of targeted killings. The prime minister, the vice premier, senior officials who had been personally charged by Danjong's dying father to protect the boy, killed at the palace gates. And then Suyang walked into the palace, found his terrified nephew, and reportedly made Danjong beg him. According to one account, the boy king literally said, "Uncle, please spare me." And Suyang, future King Sejo, took the royal command tablet right out of his nephew's hands. For 2 years after the coup, Danjong stayed on as a figurehead. No real power, his uncle running everything. And then, in 1455, Suyang forced the abdication. Danjong, now 14, handed over the crown. His uncle became King Sejo, and Danjong was renamed, demoted really, to Prince Nosan. Prince Nosan. Not a king, not even a prince with much dignity. A title that meant, you're being managed. His wife, who had been queen, was stripped of her status too, pushed out of the palace. Now, at this point, Sejo actually had shown some restraint. He let the boy live. He let him stay near the capital. And then, in 1456, a group of 6 officials, brilliant scholars, men personally appointed by Sejong and Munjong, men who had been specifically tasked with protecting Danjong, they hatched a plot. These are the Sayukshin, the 6 Martyred Ministers. Their plan? Assassinate Sejo at a royal banquet during the visit of a Ming Dynasty envoy. Restore Danjong to the throne. 2 of them would be stationed as honorary sword bearers right next to the king, close enough to act. It failed. At the last moment, one of the conspirators, Kim Ji, lost his nerve. He told his father-in-law. His father-in-law told the court. The whole plot unraveled overnight. What followed was brutal. The 6 scholars were seized and tortured. Sejo, who had actually valued some of these men and promoted them personally, tried to get them to repent. They refused. They wrote death poems affirming their loyalty to Danjong. They wouldn't even address Sejol with his royal title. More than 70 people were executed in connection with the plot. Their families, wives, children were enslaved. And now Sejol had a problem that wasn't going away. Every time someone wanted to challenge him, they rallied around one name, one face, one boy in exile, Danjong. So in 1457, Sejol made his decision. Here's what the official record says happened next, what the Sillok actually states in the reign of Sejol himself. Prince Nosan, Danjong, hanged himself upon hearing of the execution of his sympathizers, and the court conducted his funeral with proper rites. That's it. 5 lines, no details, no witnesses named, no questions asked. And here's the problem with that story. The official Sillok was written under Sejol's reign, by Sejol's officials, to legitimize Sejol's rule. Would you trust a murder suspect to write the crime report? Nobody talks about this part, but here's what's extraordinary. The Joseon Dynasty itself couldn't stick to that original story. A century after Danjong's death, during the reign of King Seonjo, we're talking 1567 to 1608, a senior official stands before the king and says something remarkable. He recounts that a royal inspector was dispatched to Yongwol, specifically to administer a poisoned drink. And then, and this detail matters, he says the record of this matter still exists in the state tribunal archives. Let that sink in. He's not speculating. He says there's a paper trail, in the official government records, of an ordered poisoning. But then it gets stranger still. By the time of King Seokjong, late 1600s, early 1700s, a third version enters the official record. And this one reads less like an administrative document and more like a ghost story that refuses to leave. In this account, a royal inspector named Wang Bangyeon arrives in Yongwol carrying Sejol's order. But when he gets there, he freezes. He can't bring himself to do it. He stands in silence. And then Danjong himself steps out and asks, "Why are you here?" Wang says nothing. At that moment, one of Danjong's scholars, a young man who had stayed with the exiled king out of loyalty, steps forward and volunteers to carry out the deed himself. He does it. And then, immediately, blood pours from the scholar's 9 orifices. He drops dead on the spot. This detail, the scholar dying instantly, is interpreted in the Confucian tradition as a sign that heaven did not sanction what just happened, that it was not a righteous execution, that the mandate of heaven was being violated. And this is the version that eventually made it into the official annals during Seokjong's reign. The 18th century scholar Yi Gumyik, compiling unofficial histories in his Yolyosil, went even further. He recorded the specific method. A court attendant fastened a long cord to a bowstring and pulled it tight through a window behind the seated king. Strangulation, from behind, through a window. So in less than 250 years, the official story went from, he hanged himself in grief, to, he was poisoned on royal orders, to, he was strangled and the act was so wrong that God himself struck down the man who did it. The dynasty couldn't decide which lie to tell, and each new version revealed a little more of what actually happened. Here's the other thing nobody fully tells you about. The place where Danjong was sent, Cheongnyongpo in Yeongwol, wasn't just an exile location. It was a natural prison. And Sejol's court chose it deliberately. It's a peninsula surrounded on 3 sides by the Donggang River and backed by steep cliffs on the 4th. The only way in or out is by boat. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. The locals couldn't even get close without crossing the water. And Danjong was 16 years old, stripped of his title, living in this remote mountain valley with almost no one. There's a record in the Sillok, a small entry from a local official that reads, "When the time came, the whole town was in a panic. A county official named Hung-do wept over the body, prepared a coffin, and gave him a burial." That's it. That's the entire contemporaneous record of Danjong's burial. And that, those 2 quiet lines about a local official weeping over a dead boy, became the spark for the king's warden. Here's the part that gets me. After Danjong died, Sejol initially ordered that the body be thrown into the river. Anyone who gave him a proper burial would face execution. Amhumdo did it anyway. And then Sejo, likely out of some complicated mix of guilt and political calculation, quietly backed down and did not punish him. Even the executioner seemed to know something was wrong. By the way, Danjong didn't even spend his entire exile at Cheongryongpo. The Sillok records that a flood in the summer of 1457 forced him to relocate to a guest house called Kwanpunghon, right in the middle of what is now downtown Yeongwol. You can walk past it today. Most people don't know what it is. He died there, in a town guest house, not in the famous scenic peninsula the movies show. So if everyone more or less knew the truth, that Danjong was executed on Sejo's orders, why did the official lie persist for so long? The answer is almost embarrassingly simple once you see it. Every single king of Joseon after Sejo was Sejo's descendant. Think about that. Restoring Danjong, even posthumously, even just calling him a king, meant implicitly acknowledging that the man who founded your entire royal lineage was a usurper, a murderer, someone who killed his own nephew to take a throne that wasn't his. That is a legitimacy problem that doesn't go away. And it gets worse. There was the matter of the Six Martyred Ministers. For decades after Sejo's reign, the official position was that they were traitors. That's what the dynasty said. These men who refused to betray a 12-year-old orphan king, traitors. It wasn't until the Sarim faction rose to dominate Joseon politics more than a century later that opinion fully shifted. They began to be venerated. Shrines were built. The philosopher Hamseok-kun would eventually say that the moral courage of those 6 men more than offset the shame of 5 centuries of Joseon dynasty. And then there was the woman everyone forgets, Danjong's queen, Lady Song, later known as Queen Chongsun. When Danjong was exiled, she was pushed out of the palace too, stripped of her status, made essentially a commoner. There's even an account, disputed but persistent, that one of Sejo's own officials requested she be made a slave. Sejo reportedly refused that one, a small mercy. She lived for 64 more years after Danjong's death, outliving him by 6 decades, outliving Sejo himself, outliving most of the people who destroyed her life. She reportedly climbed a mountain to look in the direction of Yeongwol, weeping. She died in 1521. She was 81. Her tomb is in Namyeongju. The pine trees planted there, all of them, have their branches facing east, toward Yeongwol, toward where Danjong is buried. They say she grew them that way on purpose. The formal restoration finally came in 1698, 241 years after Danjong's death. King Sukjong restored Danjong's title, gave him the temple name Danjong, restored his queen status as Queen Chongsun. It sparked fierce debate in the court because everyone knew what it meant. It was as close as the Joseon dynasty ever came to officially admitting what Sejo did was wrong. Here's what I keep coming back to. We have a 17-year-old boy, the most legitimately born king in 500 years of Joseon history by his dynasty's own rules. A boy who never had a mother, whose father died when he was 11, who watched the men sworn to protect him get murdered in a single night, who was stripped of his throne at 14, exiled at 16, killed before his 18th birthday. And then, this is the part that says everything. The people who killed him couldn't even tell a consistent story about how they did it. 3 different official accounts, 3 different methods, written under 3 different kings, each one revised slightly to make the dynasty look a little less monstrous. The director of the king's warden put it well. Should successful coups be applauded? Should failed justice be forgotten? I think about that question, and I think about the fact that right now, in 2026, people are getting on boats in Yeongwol to cross a river to a forested peninsula. To stand in a place where a teenage boy once looked at mountains and knew he was never going home. Not because a movie told them to, because something about this story refuses to stay buried. The Joseon Sillok tried to bury it in 5 vague lines. Later kings kept revising it. 200 years of silence. And still, the town of Yeongwol holds a festival every year. When it rains, they say Danjong is crying. Some stories just won't let go. This has been Korea Untold. You've seen the show, now you've heard the truth. If this is your kind of history, the kind with cracks in the official record, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.